Everyone, thank you so much for joining me here today. I got the infamous Ben Kolp here. He's a friend of a good friend of mine who's a great coach. I know her by Kay. Her real name is Karen. And Ben, I wanted to reach out to you, just speaking with Kay and just understanding, just having her tell me her version of the story of raising your kids, and she talks about you often and how you show up and like the powerful husband that you are, and but not only that, what a great father that you are. I wanted to have you on here, and I'm really happy that we were able to connect.
Yeah, I'm glad
And
to
this
be
is our
here.
first time meeting this way.
Yeah. Mhm.
So for those of you who don't know, Ben, how many kids do you have? What are the names?
We've got two boys, 21 and 17.
Awesome. And what would you say is your happiest memory so far being a dad?
um, it's tough. Definitely the day they're born is like incredible. With our first one, Max, he was an emergency C-section. So it was quite the incredible day. Getting through all of that and then finally getting to meet him. And then with Jay, it was kind of, we had a planned C-section. So it was like, all right, this is cool. And actually Karen surprised me. We decided not to know the sex of the babies, So when Jay was born, after he was born, I'm holding him. She's like, "Oh, here, there's a card for you in the book I brought to read, just in case she would get bored after childbirth." And I open it up and it says, "Congratulations on your son." And I'm like, "Hold on a second here. I didn't think we knew." Like, because she had this head time. Like, is there another one for a girl? She's like, "No, I found out, and knew you didn't want to know." So, those days are, in one way, those are the best days. It's just really kind of an incredible thing that humans can do. But there's I'm horrible when it comes to things like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? I don't know. There's been a lot of really good times, and with each kid, there's probably a different moment that I would say is my favorite. And like I said, it's tough for me to say what my favorite is, but it's definitely when the kids kind of discover something that, and they're like, "Did you know this, Dad?" Well, yeah, I've known about it. But to them, it's like the most incredible thing. It could be catching a fish or looking under a rock and just realizing how not just innocent, but how open their minds are to everything.
Wow.
So they've taught me, they've changed me. They've taught me so much. When you're younger, you're like, "Oh, I know." I see this in my 21-year-old. "Oh, this is I know everything. This is cool. I'm ready to take on the world." And your kid comes and it's like, "Holy cow, I didn't know any of this."
In what way would you say they've also changed you?
They've definitely made me open my eyes to how different people are. I really thought they would be, in a sense, who I made them to be. But when they're born, you see their personalities. And, if you try to change those personalities, I would assume that goes very badly. They are who they are. And so I had to learn to work with them. They're very different from me in some ways. In many ways, they're very different from me. So I was really kind of surprised at that. And so I had to learn to work with who they were. I remember telling Karen, I'm like, when we have kids, they're going to be perfect. When I say, "Get over here," they're going to stand right by my side and they're going to be quiet.
Wow.
And I'm like, it's not like that at all. And I couldn't really be that father after seeing how they were. They really are their own people. So they really taught me to respect the differences in people and understand that people are really different, not just the way they're brought up, but who they are from when they're born.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you hear a lot of these stories about dads like like dad wanted, like I was talking to a gentleman the other day. He was like, yeah, like I wanted my son to play baseball. Like I loved baseball and I wanted him to play it. And his son was playing baseball because his dad wanted him to, not because of him. And like fortunately there was a lot of great lessons, but I've heard that story more often than not where the kid just hates the game, and he just hates how his dad treated him and how he showed up.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like for you, like what was the challenging aspect of raising kids who are just different from you? And you had two, so now they're both, it's not like they're both the same, they're both different too.
Yeah. So, the challenge is recognizing in yourself you have to make a change, to accept them for who they are. And at the same time, it's always a balance of like, okay, you're different than me, but this is something we have to do. Like you've got to do this thing. When it came to sports, I played soccer growing up. Didn't play it in high school. I ended before high school. And around here, soccer is kind of the game that everybody starts at, usually. And they both played soccer, and they weren't really into it. And to be honest, I didn't mind going to the field and watching them play, but it was kind of always like, it was more funny than really a sport to me, because all the kids are doing their own little thing, right? They're not even learning how to work as a team yet. It's more just on, you be on the field, when the ball comes to you, do something with it, as opposed to being like, oh, there goes the ball. So when Max didn't care for it much, and that was okay. I was fine with that. And Jay kind of liked it, didn't have a great coach though, and went away from it. So, and then he ended up going back to it later on, like 3, 4, 5 years later, because he realized in himself, this is something I actually kind of like. So yeah, I mean, the challenge, with sports, I wanted them to do something and get out, get some exercise, but I was okay with them saying, you know what, this isn't for me. What's funnier is that I learned this with Max. I can't remember how old he was. I'm guessing he was like 4 or 5. For Christmas, we bought him a bunch of Matchbox cars, something I loved as a kid. He's gonna love these. And he's like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. Never picked him up again. I was like, oh, well, Max, you want to play with Matchbox cars? No. I'm like, really? Like that's not your thing? And I had to learn along the way. It's like they're different. So accept them for who they are, and then not just be like, oh, you like that other thing, but to be like, okay, great, you like that other thing. Let me see if I can, maybe I can't be as interested in it, but I can support them in that.
Was there ever any resistance to like, you know what, I know, like I want you to do this, and not so much like a disciplinarian thing, or just like regular rules? It's almost like was there ever an inclination that like why aren't you more like me, or why aren't you more like this person, like just do it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It wasn't the day they were born where I'm like, wow, they just have their own personalities, and I have to respect that. I had to learn. I mean, it was a learning process the whole time, and really Karen, she helped me learn that as well. I didn't have a younger brother or sister, never really babysat kids or anything, so I was pretty clueless. So it took time, and definitely, I wouldn't say Max necessarily took the brunt of it, but he was the first one you make your mistakes on.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a learning process. And I wouldn't say to them like, why aren't you like me? It was more like, guys, listen, you need to do this, or this is what we're doing. And when it wasn't, like you said, like if it's not something about disciplinary, the one thing was like with soccer, I was like, listen, you said you were going to play, so as long as they're not having a horrible time, I'm like, listen, you need to show up for your team. Trying to balance learning a lesson with what's really important. If they absolutely hated soccer or something like that, I'd be like, fine, you don't have to go. We'll just quit. But they're both kind of like, yeah, but I want to go, but I don't want to go today. It's like, well, no, you got to go today. And, so really kind of balancing that. And there was never any punishment for something like that. It was more like, listen, you committed to this. You need to show up for it. So it was usually a conversation. We never dragged them kicking and screaming because that just wouldn't make any sense. That happened to me definitely as a kid once or twice. So it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Let's not do that.
And what made you want to show up in that way? Because you've got, again, like, there are men out there who are like, I want my kid to be the next this, or want them to do the things that I didn't get to do. And it's like, okay, but the kid probably never did want to do that.
Yeah.
And to you, like it sounds like it's a very conscious decision from the beginning. And so you don't have any siblings, or you just don't have any younger siblings?
I don't have any younger siblings. I have an older brother, 2 year older.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Like, I'm curious what made that decision. Like, you know what? They are different, and I accept them for who they are, and I'm gonna choose to show up for them in that way, instead of just kind of forcing them to mold into who you maybe wanted or expected them to be.
Yeah, I think, it was I would say it was a kind of an organic decision. Like I said, originally it was like, oh, they're going to be the perfect kids. They're going to obey me. I'm going to make sure, I was thinking like they're dogs,
Yeah.
or you can get a dog, you say, heel, and they come and they sit right next to you. It's just not kids. And that'd be horrible to actually do to a child. You want them to listen so they don't run out into a road, right? But I think it's something that came over time as I realized that they are their own person. I'm not one to say, you must do this thing that really is, it's an option. If they said they didn't want to play soccer, we would never have signed up for soccer. So I think, I don't know, I guess I've always kind of been that way. It's like, well, why do something if it's not something that you really want to do? But we want the kids to experience things. So if we can, maybe cajole them a little bit to try something out, so they can have that experience and say, yeah, I like it, or no, I don't. Because a lot of times kids will hear something and they'll be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And then they do it. And I'm like, oh my God, that was awesome. So, you can't just take no for an answer all the time. But I think in general, I'm a gentle person. I'm not someone who usually gets very angry. And I certainly have gotten, angry in my life and at the kids and stuff. But I think a lot of times I live by the golden rule: treat people the way you want to be treated. You don't want somebody yelling at you, making you do something you don't want to do, that you don't necessarily have to do. So
I love that. And well, tell me, what is, what is that part, that thing that you had in your relationship with maybe your dad or your mom, or even both of them, that you've been wanting to create in the relationship that you have with your kids?
So with my father passed away when I was 8. He passed away from leukemia. So my mom raised my brother and I for most of our lives, obviously. And well, I have some good memories of him. Most of my memories are, how my mother raised me. And she was she's just always there for us, which, blows me away, because I cannot imagine raising 2 kids on my own. It just, to me, it's mind boggling. She did an incredible job. So, I was into comic books when I was a kid, and before I could ride to the comic book store on my bike, she would take me there, and she'd wait outside for like up to an hour while I'm going through all the comics and everything. And, that's just, between that and then, taking me to, I was into music. So I was in, the school band and stuff, she'd drive me around. So, being there for the kids, my mother definitely modeled that for me. And doing all the kind things that she did for us. So, I definitely was very lucky to end up with the parents I did. So I think I really, got that from them. I have to say that's where it probably came through that. And like I said, in general, I'm kind of a gentle person. I'm usually pretty shy when it comes to groups of people and new people. So, it's, I think it just comes a little bit naturally to be less forceful.
What are you doing with your kids that is an upgrade from how your dad raised you for your first 8 years and how your mom raised you for the rest of your life?
I'd say actually giving them more freedom. So there's definitely stuff we had to do as kids that we didn't want to do, and still my kids have to today, like, raking the yard and stuff like that. It's like we all have to do that. But I felt like there was probably more structure, when we were kids, and today kind of like just letting them do their own thing, and then supporting them in that. So, for example, both the kids have been homeschooled. And so, for me, school was it was rigid, and you had to do your homework, and Karen can attest to this. Every day I'd come home from work and they're doing, they had school at home. I was like, so what'd you guys learn today? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, what? So that took a long time for me to learn. It's like they're doing their own thing and they are learning. It's just hard to see sometimes, but they're both really intelligent kids. And like I said, it took years for me to learn that, to let them kind of explore the educational areas on their own, obviously with the help of Karen. And then they both ended up going to a school that was interest-led learning. So even with that, I was still like, what are they going to learn? And they're both just obviously learning an incredible amount. They're both great human beings. So like I said before, they taught me patience. And that's one of the things I've learned, is that sometimes you can't get the measure of a person right away, and you can't get the measure of what they're doing, what their goals and their aspirations are, who they're going to turn out to be. It just takes a long time sometimes to really see that and figure that out. And it's been neat watching them. And then especially in I'd say the last 3 years for Jay, who's 17, and with Max, it's probably been the last 6 or 7 years, because they just hit an age where you really start to make connections with. I remember when they were a baby even, and they were doing this thing, and it just has followed them through their whole lives. They're part of their personality. So,
like, the homeschooling stuff is interesting to me. So I know a little bit about it. And I'd love for you, like what was that decision? What made you make the decision, you and Kay, to take the kids out and kind of be their teachers? And take care of that.
So Karen, she was a preschool teacher to begin with, so she's got a very good background in education. And Max was having a hard time at school, and the teacher, I don't think it was the teacher, I think it was the principal or someone, was like, oh, there's medication that can help. We're like, what? They're just like jumping right to, putting your kid on drugs. And it was like, that's wrong. And Karen knew that was wrong. We had a family down the road, and we live literally, we're like 5 houses away from the school, the elementary school. And there's a family that lived right next to the elementary school. And that's where we had our voting, taking place, for the town voting. You go to the school, your local school. And he was, the husband was outside. He actually is dressed as Ben Franklin, because he runs the Freedom Trail tours in Boston.
Okay.
And so, Karen's like, hey, who's this guy? And, because he's like, hey, vote, get the vote out. He's, very much about voting. So she's talking to him and everything, and finds out, oh, they homeschool. And he was like, yeah, it's great. Don't have to worry about this. Don't have to worry about that. The kids are happy. And that I think really helped convince Karen that it was the right thing to do. We also had another friend who's started homeschooling her son. So Karen had a few resources. And for me, to me, Karen's the pro. She knows what she's talking about. I was definitely nervous. I'm like, well, we can try it out, right? You can always go back. And Max it wasn't so much educational decision. He was sick. He was like having night terrors. So every night he'd wake up screaming like he was being stabbed. It was horrendous. He was losing weight. He was having headaches. So I was like, yeah, whatever we can do, let's try it. And
was that from going to school?
Yeah, anxiety. He was stressed out. He was one of those kids who they're taking a quiz, and whoever finishes the quiz can go and play someplace, right? So right away when someone finishes, he's like, I want to go play. I'm not going to finish, and he can't concentrate at that point, so he gets really anxious. So yeah, he was like, basically we called it allergic to school. And so taking him out within 6 months, he was, if not fine, he was significantly better. It was obviously that the stress from school was what was causing it. So that was one of the things the kids taught me is everybody learns at their own pace. The schools meet maybe 80% of the requirements for most of the kids, but there's that 20% of the kids who just don't really, may not fit that mold and can struggle.
And I'm so curious, like the amount of trust and the amount of faith that you guys had that this was going to work. It sounded like there was also like a huge reason why, night terrors and just his reaction towards school. Like the way I grew up, my first inclination is like, all right, well, he probably just has to get over it.
Yeah.
I'm curious how many people told you that?
I think that's kind of what the teacher had said to him. Like, I can't remember exactly what the words were or something, but it's kind of like, well, you kind of have to do what you have to do, Max. And that doesn't work on a little kid. I mean, it might work on a kid who isn't having the problem that he was having, but he just we knew he was sick. I mean, really, in a sense, he was getting sick because of school. So it was at that point, it was like, I don't care if he's learning. I just want him to be better. I could also use a good night's sleep myself. I mean, it's kind of like we have this thing where we had our smoke detectors for like years would go off 2 to 3 times a year, at least in the middle of the night. And, that's what it was like every time with him. So it's like, you knew, you don't ever want to see your kids sick, but when they're like that, it's, you need to do something. And we knew we could always put them back in school. I mean, that's the thing. It's, it's a public school system. You can always put them back into school. And I think one of the things that originally we were like, well, maybe we should have kept him back a year. We're like, but still holding him back means he's still in school. He's still subject to all of these stresses that he wasn't dealing with well.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, so I'm guessing like in this realm of homeschooling, because not only did Max go, but Jay went too. And I'm guessing you also, I mean, I don't know how, did you meet other people who were homeschooling their kids too? Like, was that an easier thing to do now that you're in this world?
Yeah, I think with the advent of social media, homeschooling was growing anyway. The original thought everybody has is people who are homeschooling are religious. They're homeschooling for religious reasons, or for their child has a major learning disability or something like that the schools couldn't meet. And that actually couldn't be farther from the truth. It was people who just either for whatever reason, their kids didn't do well in school, and it was very easy to connect with other homeschoolers. Now, I'm not the one who did it. I mean, that was really Karen. But so she met the people down the street, and her friend was homeschooling. So those were two connections that led to more connections. And then with all of the online availability of, for people to connect, people were scheduling park days and, days to museums and things like that. So it really was not isolating at all. The biggest concern everybody would have is like, well, how will your kids be socialized? How will they know how to interact? That was the least of our concerns. There's plenty of socialization, absolutely plenty of socialization. And school, the reality is kids learn for about 4 hours a day in school, even though they're there for 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you're actually having to have your kids sit at home for 8 hours a day learning and then go out and get that half hour of recess with friends. Mm-hmm. It's like, you get 2 to 4, 5, 6 hours of education in, whatever that might mean, in a day. And then you've got, 2 hours a day where you can go and hang out with friends. But often it was more, today's park day. Today's the day we socialize like crazy and have tons of fun, and the next day you do school,
Yeah, I mean, like now I'm like, I want to be homeschooled now.
Oh yeah,
30 years old, and I want to do it now. And the way you're showing, and I'm curious. So like, I have some ideas for why, but I'm curious, what were the reasons why you decided to also homeschool Jay?
So Jay would have been one of those kids who would have been labeled hyper. So I don't know if you ever played the Wii Sports with the fencing, right? Wow. Nobody could beat Jay. I mean, I don't know how old he was, 5 years old. He would just jump and just swing, 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 swing. And he had so much energy. If he's watching a movie, he would stand in front of the TV and just bounce like Tigger. I mean, he just couldn't sit still. And the fact was, it's like, well, you're homeschooling one, homeschooling another isn't really much more work, and why have to worry about sending him to school when you're already having a good experience with your other kid. And then they both, if they wanted to and they wanted to go to school, we would have sent them back to school, but neither of them wanted to go. They did, like I said, once I think Max was 16. I can't remember when he started, maybe 15. And Jay was 17. I think Jay was 14. They started, Max went for a year before Jay did, but to this interest-led learning school. And it's non-coercive, which basically means if the kids don't want to take a class, they don't take a class. There's a bunch of different classes that are available to them, and they take what they're interested in. And they love that school. They did not want to miss a day of that school.
Wow.
Yeah. So seeing that and how that type of education works versus, the kids who go to a high school, go stand in line, go, a bell rings, you've got to be a place before the bell rings, another bell rings. I grew up in it. I did okay. Many people do. But to see kids who don't have to live by those, call them standards, I think they get a very different view of the world. They're very lucky. And I feel very privileged. I think my kids are privileged to be able to have the education that they've had.
Who would you say, so like, again, like, I love what you mentioned. There isn't one way of learning.
Yeah.
And I know for me, like, you learn visually, you learn like reading, auditory. And for me, I also learn by doing. That to me is a big one. And I'm curious, like, because they're like, the biggest person who I feel like would benefit from this conversation is probably like the parent with a kid who's been labeled ADHD or labeled with all these things, and they need to be medicated, and they have these behavioral issues. Like, who would you say would benefit from homeschool? Like, why? Like, and I don't want to use this as a platform of like, yeah, like we're selling you on homeschool. It's more like I can feel just the enormous benefits from your kids, and just from hearing from you and from Kay, and like, I'm curious Like, why
Yeah.
would someone do this?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think, you know, my background is in audio, sound recording technology,
Hmm.
even though I don't do that now. And people always used to come up and to me, knowing that I had this background, and would say, "Hey, I want to buy a new pair of speakers. Which one should I get?" And I'd say, "Get the ones that sound good to you." Like,
Mm.
some people don't hear certain frequencies, or don't really care. Well, why would you spend hundreds of dollars on speakers when, you know, the ones for $100 you're happy with? So when it comes to education, it's kind of the same thing. If your kids are doing well, and you don't have an inclination to teach them yourself,
Hmm.
you know, your public school may be perfectly fine, or, you know, you send them to a private school, whatever your choice is. Um, so it's not like a child has to have a problem to be homeschooled. A child doesn't have to be typical to be homeschooled. Um, but you have a lot more control over their education. You know, so I think it could benefit anybody. But of course, you know, it is homeschooling. It's done by the parent or parents, as well as even siblings, right? If you, depending on how much older your children are from the other children you have, because we do know families that, you know, there's quite a difference in between. And I know that, you know, you certainly can have the older kids start teaching the younger kids on some things. So, you know, I think it could apply to anybody, but
Hmm.
obviously you've got to be able to take the time, have the um, have the right personality, right? Because
Hmm.
most people I meet, they're like, "Oh my God, I'd never have the patience for it," you know. And I think we've been extremely lucky that we've got Karen. I mean, first of all, I call her the child whisperer. You know, she she just she understands kids. She knows how to work with them. Um, so it makes it that much easier. But, you know, if anybody was interested in homeschooling, I mean, that's the first thing, right? If someone says, you know, that might be something that we should look into, that might be the right kind of person for it. If it's something that someone goes, "Oh my God, no way, never, ever, ever, ever," like, I want nothing to do with it, probably
Hmm.
not the right personality, you know, to do it. Because obviously it's a commitment, you know.
Yeah, and there's a wisdom in what you're saying, and just also, what is it called? Like consistency. Like,
Mhm.
is this a right fit for you?
Mhm.
Does this work with your personality? Does this work for the kids?
Does it work for the kid? Because we certainly have known people who homeschooled and now their kids go to school because that's what the kid wanted to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's listening to your children. It's
Mhm.
not for us. It wasn't school at home. It was simply education at home. So, you know, we didn't have desks the kids sat at, and at 8 o'clock you had to be at your desk. It was nothing like that at all. There were many days they were in their pajamas all day long.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean they're learning. It just means we didn't have the obstacle of, you know, getting around, making sure that you were dressed before you went to school, you know,
Mhm.
things like that. You can learn, we all know this, you can learn whether you're in your pajamas or not, you
Oh.
know. So I think anybody could do it. It's certainly easier for some people than it would be for others.
What is some advice that you have for the dad who, you know, his kid is maybe having some behavioral issues, or maybe um, he's being labeled as the trouble kid or the one who's the troublemaker, and he's like everyone's telling you like, look, he needs to be on something, or he's not a good fit here. Like, it's almost like, because again, like, you're the only you guys are the only couple that I know that has homeschooled anyone. So like, it's like, I don't even know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And what is some advice that you would give to that parent who's like, maybe their kid has night terrors right now and they don't know what to do?
You know, um, trust your gut. You know, I certainly would never say that the educators in our public school system don't know what they're talking about, because I think there's lots of good teachers, there's lots of good administration people, but trust your gut. You know, if your kid is having problems and you're not sure why, it's time to figure out what the cause is. And it's not always easy. It's not something that you can get that's straightforward. You know, we didn't go through what a lot of parents go through, which is let's diagnose and label the cause. Because, you know, you hear nowadays, it's like it went from like, I don't know, these are bogus numbers, but it was something like, you know, 2% of children have autism to 25% have autism now. And
Yeah.
no, it's just that they just expanded the label, and it doesn't, you know, we weren't into that. And again, Karen led most of this. This is something I've learned along the way. And I mean, she's done a lot of learning as well, but the school, because they have to report, right? This is a public institution. They must say, you know, this is what the kid has, and this is how we're going to treat it or manage it or whatever. They have to have a label on it. And it's tough for parents. I feel for parents who have to go through that. We know people who have gone through it. They have to fight for their kids' rights and to get the kids to be able to be educated. I won't say educated differently, but treated so that, you know, the kids are able to learn in their own way. If your kid's starting to encounter problems, first of all, realize they're still your kid. You know, it doesn't mean they're going to necessarily have some sort of lifelong issue. It's just learning what is the cause, what makes them happy, what makes them sad. You know, it's almost like anything else. And I'm probably grossly oversimplifying for some families, because obviously there are children who have severe special needs. You know, but for those people whose kids just don't maybe seem to fit in, it's helping your kids understand, you know, figure out who they are and in what areas they feel comfortable and that they can excel, and environments, you know, that they're comfortable and where they can excel. You know, it's not easy. That's for certain. And we were, like I said, we were very fortunate that we could take Max out of school, and then we watched him get better. That was in a way quite amazing, you know, and we're lucky that we were able to do that.
And it's one thing of saying like, hey, like I have my kid, he went through this, like he's been going through this, I'm doing homeschool and he seems to be doing a great improvement. But then there's the other thing of like, look, we did this and we finished it, and here's where we are now. So where would you say like Max is now, like compared to maybe other people his age?
So yeah, you know, if we didn't have the pandemic, it'd probably be easier to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Max is like a lot of young adults his age are struggling a bit because of the pandemic. So he was going to community college, and when the pandemic hit, he stayed in during the initial semester. And then he decided, okay, I'll go for the fall semester, which was all online, and he hated it. So he's like, I'm done with this. So he decided to take the next semester off. And one of the things he always wanted to do was become an EMT. So he made the decision. He went kind of back to that dream and took a summer course, became an EMT, and is now working for an ambulance company. So in general, I'd say he's actually doing very well. He's following his dream. He's so intelligent and so smart. You know, the other day, I can't remember, it was something about COVID. Oh no, because I got my booster shot, and I felt horrible, you know, 12 hours later. And I was like, oh, you know, maybe it was because this, right? I asked him, you know, some question about it, and right away he's like, oh, well, I can't tell you for certain because, you know, that's really you know, you have to have a degree in virology or something for this. And he just goes off and I'm like, oh my God, I knew asking him was the right thing. Because I knew he might not have the perfect answer, but he had an answer for it. You know, both the kids they think for themselves. They're very intelligent. They were both into the humanities in this interest-led learning school. And they're just such good people. They're such nice people. So I'd say, you know, for Max right now, being 21, he's actually doing very well. You know, of course, he's got struggles and challenges, but nothing that that can't be overcome, and nothing that you know, had we kept him in school and gone through, you know, we never know what might have happened. But I would bet we did much better. He's done much better with the path that we took than having to stayed in school.
If we were to go back in time with each of your sons, what would you do differently?
Well, if I had the knowledge that I have today, I mean, I certainly would have not had to go through all of the relearning, right? So saying, oh, you know, what'd you guys learn today? I'm putting them on the spot about school, homeschooling and stuff like that. I probably would actually have spent more time fostering the things that they love. You know, I tried to support it as much as I could before, but I think now I'm not always the most confident person. I look back now, I'm like, yeah, I knew this then, and I knew this then, but I wasn't really certain about it. So I probably would have spent a little more time supporting them in the areas that they're actually excelling at right now. They both love music. They both play guitar and bass, and Max plays what's it called? It's like the lap steel, which is kind of guitar.
Okay.
So I probably would have fostered their love of music even more earlier on, but at the same time, sometimes really that's one of the things I learned. They've got to be at a point in their life where they're ready. They both love music, but had we said, hey, we're going to make you take lessons earlier on, that might not have worked. It might have said, you know, they're like, I don't want to do that. That's not for me. And it might have pushed them away from it. So, you know, you always watch the sci-fi shows when they're like, oh, you know, don't go back in time because you could change the timeline. Yeah. So, you know, if I knew what I knew now, I could screw things up pretty bad. If I tried.
It's a tough question because it's like at the end of the day, everything led us to where we are now.
Yeah, they are who they are because of decisions we made and because of decisions they made. So
let's do the flip side of that question. What would you do the same?
Homeschool, that's for certain. Send them, definitely send them to the school that they went to, this interest-led learning school. Probably, if I were to do it a little bit differently, I would have looked into that sooner, maybe. Although that school was kind of just getting off the ground earlier. So, you know, spending the family vacations, definitely. We also, up until probably 2 years ago, probably when the pandemic started, almost every night we were sitting down to eat dinner as a family. That was huge. We would have great discussions with the kids at dinner. It's definitely one of the things that I think, you know, Karen probably would agree was so important throughout our family's life, is having dinner together or a meal together each day. Everybody's rushing around and you sit down, you enjoy your food, and you have a conversation. And that's when I would learn a lot about the kids, because I was, working during the day. I spent probably 6 years of their lives finishing 2 different basements in the 2 houses that we lived in. So, there's times I didn't get to see them or talk to them or do something with them. So definitely eating dinner together was really important. It was kind of like, how was your day? What did you do today? What was fun today? Not asking, what did you learn today? But, what was fun today? Or, you don't seem like you're in a good mood. What was bad? So really sitting down and talking, listening, asking questions that they might want to answer that helps you understand them.
Yeah, time is one of those currencies that it's the most expensive, and it's also the priceless one. What are some of your proudest moments as a dad so far?
Honestly, for Max right now, becoming an EMT, I mean, to me, he wants to do it because he wants to help people, and he's just interested in the sciences. So for that, the biology and medicine and things, to have a child we've always wanted our kids to contribute to society in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be huge. We just don't want them to be, takers in a sense, people who are just living and not contributing. And, our goal is to make sure our kids were contributing positively, not that I hate the word takers even, but just didn't want them to sit back and just be consumers, So really proud of Max for taking this dream that he kind of put aside a few years ago when he started going to community college, and saying, you know what, that's what I really want to do, doing it. And now he's doing something that helps people. And other kids, other young adults, I should say, during the pandemic, I mean, a lot of them struggled. They were like, they don't know what to do. And he made a decision, and it's a huge decision, right? Because he's not going to school. It was a financial decision because you have to put money out to go and get that education. And then to say, okay, this is a job I'm going to do for at least a little while. So very proud of him for that. And Jay, he is, each year, I want to say he's gone 3 years, and 2 of the years at this school, he's been voted a community pillar. He's gotten the Community Pillar Award. He and the teachers just talk about him so highly. They love him. And they basically have said, there's a few kids each year who kind of make the school work. This is a very small school of like 25, 35 kids. And he's like, Jay is one of those kids. He helps the school run. And he's just got so much empathy for people, too much sometimes. I can hold you back as well, but he's just such a good kid. He's so nice, and cares so much, that it's like you can't help but be proud of him. So they're really good kids. I can't, 21 years ago, I was like, had the most weirdest ideas about how my kids would be, right? In terms of how they would act and everything. It hasn't turned out at all like I planned, but it's turned out great and absolutely fabulous. They're really good kids.
On the flip side of that, what would you say is your biggest regret?
Definitely been a few of those. One of my biggest regrets, and it actually kind of goes back to finishing the basement. The basements, we were just about a month, two months ago, had a campfire with some neighbors, and we're talking about all the home improvement stuff we've all been doing. And, it's a time suck. And I was like, I literally spent 10 years. It was probably a total of like amount of 6, but it went on for 10 years, finishing 2 different basements, because I finished a basement at one house, and then we moved. That took me 3 years of that house. And then I spent 7 years in this house, slowly refinishing the basement. And it took so much time away from the family. That is one of my biggest regrets. I don't know how I would do it differently exactly, but I just feel like I would come home, I would eat dinner, I would go down to the basement. And then by the time I'd come back up, it's time for their bed. And, I would read to them and stuff. So it's not like I wasn't involved in that, but I kind of missed all that stuff from coming home until bedtime. Except meals, obviously. Like I said, we eat dinner together. So that's one big regret that I have. It's not spending that time, because like you said, can't get that back.
Yeah, no, that's it. That is the consistent thing that I've heard with every single person I've spoken to.
Yeah. And it's hard to realize that and recognize it in the moment, but sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, hey, like I tomorrow, next time, I got to do what I got to do. And then before you know, even if it's just 1 year, it's like, okay, that's a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to be 7 anymore.
Yep.
So that's so interesting there. And I'm curious with regard to, so there are a variety of people who listen to this. And one of my missions is, help prepare that relationship with dad and their kids. And for the man who's not in his child's life as often, maybe, custody battle. So he's there. He probably has them every other weekend. Or maybe he lives in another state and doesn't see him as often. Or maybe he lives in another country and he sees them even less. What is some advice that you'd like to give him?
I've like I said, I've been very fortunate in my life. So, it's hard for me to kind of put myself in the position of someone who doesn't get a chance to see their kids. If they really care about them, it's got to be extremely difficult to be away from your kids that much. Or to struggle to have a relationship with them. So, knowing what I know now about how people are and how kids can be, I'd say as much as you can, listen to them. Especially when they're teenagers, it's really hard to get them to talk. Just have as much empathy as you can, listen to them, understand what they love and what they don't like, and try to be more flexible about, not necessarily your beliefs, but be open-minded and, maybe try some things you've never thought you would. Put aside those things, those preconceived notions about how your children should be, what they should be able to do or not, things they shouldn't be into. It's the more you can listen and learn from them, I think then you'll have a better chance of making a better connection with them. Because for them, it's all about them, right? Kids are really self-centered. It's hard for them. And as they get older, they start seeing the world around them and they can start relating and stuff. But kids only see, especially when they're young, it's so much about how things are impacting them. So if you can make them the most important person in the room when you're with them or when you're on the phone with them, I think that would really help. Just open your mind, listen, even those things that you have doubts about, just if you can, you put them aside. Just try to understand your child by listening to them.
For the dad who's expecting,
Mhm.
or maybe the dad who's just became a new dad, what is some advice that you want to give to him?
Throw aside your preconceived notions. It's like again, you'll be surprised. Listen and watch your kids, and they're going to teach you, so much about people. And just watch them. Enjoy as much time as you can with them. It goes by really quick, even though it doesn't seem like it's going to. Especially when they're babies, you're tired, you're a zombie, but you get used to it. Definitely have seen that, been there myself. I've watched people go through it, and I'm like, yep, you're in the zombie phase, and I predict within 1 or 2 months you're going to be fine. And it's true for the most part, right? Everybody's like, okay, I didn't know I could go, operate on 4 to 6 hours of sleep. So, yeah, it's hard at first, but just again, I think it comes down to be really open-minded. Everybody really wants the best for their kids. Who would want anything else? But sometimes the best is you only learn what the best is by listening and watching and talking to them. So enjoy it while you can.
I love that. And so this isn't for me.
Mhm.
This isn't for anyone particular listening. Well, actually, it is in particular. What is something that you want to tell Max and Jay?
I'd say how proud of them I am. And every now and then I do say that, but probably don't tell them enough. I don't want it to go to their heads.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I am extremely proud of who they are and who they are becoming, and the way they treat other people and creatures in this world. I believe I'm just so proud that they're such loving and caring people. And that, they can do anything that they want to. They really can. It's all a matter of keeping that in mind, that they are so capable.
I don't think any child would want to hear that less. So I
Yeah.
definitely invite you to tell them even more.
Mhm.
They sound like very humble people. I don't think anyone gets community pillar award because they're not humble, or someone wants to be an MT for that reason. So I'd love, tell them, man.
Yeah.
Tell them more. Oh, that's awesome. Ben, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your advice. You've really opened my eyes with a lot of stuff. Just seeing your kids and seeing just listen to that gut instinct. That to me was probably the thing that stood out the most. Listen to your gut instinct, trust yourself, and also they're different people.
Yeah, you're welcome. This has been fun. I love talking about my kids sometimes. One of them.
I love it, Ben. Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.